people in PostBox can find that content that you promoted and then choose to share that with their audience. And they're sharing it with their audience because just like you've already exhausted sharing that one piece of content with your own audience, people sharing your content have also exhausted their opportunities. And so they want to find additional content to share with their audience that is industry relevant to really deepen that relationship and engagement with them.
Welcome to the My Future Business Show, where we get you in front of your best audience and keep you there. Not only are we interviewing the biggest names in business to help you become even more successful, we're inviting you to book your spot on the show to help you grow your business. So at the end of the call, make sure you fill in the interview application form at myfuturebusiness.com/interviews. Hi, my name's Rick Nusky and welcome to today's show. And just a quick second of pause to say thank you so very much for joining us and supporting the My Future Business show. It's making all of the difference, knowing that it's making a difference for you. Now, on today's call, I have somebody incredibly talented, very special, and obviously very busy, and you will understand why that is in a moment. Welcome to the show, Benjamin Dell.
Hey, thanks for having me on. I thought you were talking about someone else.
No, absolutely not.
After me.
It is you, my friend. Now, for everybody who's not familiar with Ben, you will soon be, because Ben's the founder of Missinglettr, HeySummit, HelpShelp, and Onboard Flow, along with formerly Updately, Raw Jam, Onboard Tips, which have all been acquired. But before we jump into the core of the call, Ben, what is customary for us to do is actually unwrap you as the individual, a little bit about your life, stepping away from this sphere of business that you're so deeply ingrained in at the moment, and to learn a little bit about you. Now, I guess the first part is to ask you, Ben, where are you located in this wide, wonderful world of ours?
I like it. Yeah, I think it's often glazed over, isn't it? But we're all individuals with our own personal battles, trying to sort of carve our own sort of experiences in life. And yeah, I like that. It's a good place to start. So I'm based out in the UK. I guess an hour outside of London. If you know the UK, close to Reading, that sort of area.
Yeah.
South England.
Now I know you've got a lot going on at the moment. Do you have much time to take a break, and how important is to unwind for you?
Yeah, I think so. Life gets in the way in a good way, and sometimes sort of forces you to take breaks, even if you can't. And I think that's, from my perspective, has always been quite a healthy thing. So I've got, I'm married. I have 3 kids and a dog. So just simply having that in my life forces me to not always be working. So I walk my dog in the morning 7 days a week. I'm making pancakes for my kids on the Sunday morning. I don't work at the weekends, apart from checking emails and that sort of thing. We'll do movie nights, so those sorts of things they're the sort of pattern interrupter and keep me sane.
Yeah,
but the way I like to do it is I pretty much shut myself off from the world midweek, and then weekend is kind of have a glass of wine, spend time with the kids, with the wife, and kind of create a balance that way.
Yeah, it makes it, the way that some people might perceive professionals like yourself is that they're robots, they're just always on the go, that's all they ever do is work. And it's really quite important for the My Future Business audience to get that different perspective, that there are people behind businesses and they have thoughts and feelings and needs just like everyone else. Now, with all that being said, you are incredibly active in the online space at the moment. I'm following you on multiple channels. I have purchased almost every product that you have in your suite, and I'm just blown away by the amount of productivity and I guess functionality that you've brought to my own business. Now, I want to go back a little bit. What formal studies have you done? Did you do anything at university? What is your educational background to get to this point? Did you do anything formal?
I did, but I wouldn't necessarily attribute that to who I am today and where I am today and what I've learned.
Yeah.
So I studied computer science at university back in 1999, I think it was, until 2002, I think, around that sort of time, so 3 years. And then I worked commercially, as an employee for about a year after that. And that was enough And then from that point, I've always been in business for myself, and I've always founded companies and all that sort of thing. But crucially, my learning started at that point. When I went out into the big wide world and started learning what makes me tick. Do I enjoy the intellectual pursuit of working for other people in a big organization, that 1 year period?
Yep.
And I realized, I kind of knew it beforehand, but you don't know something, or in my sense, I find I very rarely truly know something until I've actually done it. So I had this intuition that my future was one that I had to carve for myself, that I had to be my own boss, and that was really the only way that I would have that sort of intellectual and financial freedom and everything else that I wanted out of life. But equally, I knew I had to at least try the employment route. So I did that, experienced it, taught me a lot about me and everything else, and then came out of it, and then went out from there. So yes, traditional sort of background with education, but I don't really think it gave me
much difference.
Much difference apart from life experience. I mean, it was a fundamentally incredible experience, one of the best of my life, but it's not one that informed my professional life.
Of course. Thank you again for sharing these wonderful insights, Ben. Now, the thing about becoming the boss is that the great news is that you're the boss, but unfortunately the bad news is that you're the boss. Now, when you stepped out into the world yourself and you took on all of the responsibility, was that confronting for you? Because I know that a lot of the people that are listening to the My Future Business show are startup entrepreneurs, aspiring business owners, and they get a lot of value out of speaking with people that have done it, who have walked the walk before them. Could you share a little bit about that transition with us?
Yeah, it's something that you want to be able to rush, but you can't. And it's not so much, or certainly from my perspective, it wasn't so much the weight of the additional responsibility. Being your own boss, you have to think about taxes, and you have to think about having an accountant and staff and all those sorts of things. Actually, those things kind of work themselves out when you get to that stage where you can afford staff and you have money coming in to actually require an accountant. And all that kind of, that dominoes that kind of fall over because the previous one knocked it. The thing that I think I found the toughest really was that you enter this world where you're convinced that this is the path that you're taking. You're going to be an entrepreneur. You've got some ideas. You want to do things, but you struggle to actually find what you're good at. And I think this is one of the most common fallacies I found with speaking with other so-called entrepreneurs, which is you kind of, because you're often a jack of all trades, and the downside of that is that you struggle with trying to work out what you're truly good at in multiple ways, both in sort of practical day-to-day, how do you actually get stuff done sort of sense, but also just more sort of macro level. What are you here to do? Like, what are you, not in a spiritual sense, but just in a, what is the type of business that you flourish most in? What sort of value do you really bring to that, business creation, ideation, sort of running sort of realm? And it took me many, many years. When I first came out of that first job, I knew I wanted to start a business, and so I started a business. I registered it through the local, with the government, with Companies House, as it's called over here. Came up with a name, created some stationery, business card, letterhead, all the things that you did back then, and then sat back and thought, okay, I've done, that was the fun stuff. Like, what do I do next? Like, I actually hadn't worked out how to form ideas, how to actually have conviction over the vision that you attach to those ideas, and how best you work in that whole ideation process. And I suspect that's not uncommon a lot across a lot of people. You do the things that you think you should be doing, or that appeal to you, like the business cards and everything else, the badge of honor. And the other stuff just takes time.
Yeah, that's really interesting that you should say that. You strike me, Ben, as somebody who seems to have a natural tendency to be self-driven, self-directed, unlike an employee per se. What would you say about those who struggle with this mindset of, hey, I own this is my responsibility? Is this something that they can learn to develop as a behavior?
Yeah, I think almost anything can be learned, but you've got to work out whether it is, I think, two-sided. One, is it actually playing to your strengths? And this is something that we need to all learn as individuals. What sort of environments serve us, and which ones do we actually contribute to in a positive way? Are we most effective in? And the other one is just enjoy it. So it's all very well and good saying, I want to be a business owner, or I want to be my own boss. But if it actually drains you emotionally, if it stresses you out because of all those ancillary things, it's managing teams and the risk, the risk reward with finances and all that sort of stuff. Or if you enjoy it, don't find it stressful, but you just find actually you're not the best person for the job, that is very, very possible that you and actually I've got a very recent story regarding HeySummit about that, which is, I spent all this time, being the founder, being my own boss, creating these companies. And when it came to HeySummit, a virtual summit platform that was, I created about coming up to 2 years ago, actually, in August.
2 years.
About a year ago, decided, and as it was starting to sort of grow, I realized that actually I'm a really, really good founder, but I'm a terrible CEO. And what I mean by that is that I'm really good at identifying opportunity and coming up with the raw idea and looking at what that vision is and getting that first sort of initial traction, if you will, and sort of carving out its sort of space in the wider market, and getting it to that stage. But then when you've got to start managing, in inverted quotes, the business, and you've got to start thinking about company culture and policies and business plans, strategies, and all the sort of, in my mind, the boring stuff, essential stuff, don't get me wrong, but kind of the stuff that doesn't serve my soul.
Doesn't light you up.
I actually brought someone in, a good old friend of mine actually, who's now doing far better than I ever could have done with HeySummit, in as the CEO. We've got a wonderful, flourishing team there. So I think, ask yourself, are you best, what sort of role are you best served filling, and does it actually fulfill you emotionally and everything else?
Yeah, that's some sage advice. Now, I want to go back, Ben, to that moment in time, the very first sale that you ever made. Can you remember it?
Good question. Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Yeah, because I wonder, is it as telling and as memorable? Maybe not by all senses. But you get that first sale, and then you get that momentum. Then you start to recognise, hey, look, I'm onto something here. What you talked about being great at, that founding and that ideation, but how important has it been for you to listen to those around you and build community and listen to the people that buy from you? Has that helped you along the way?
It absolutely has, but I also like to apply a pinch of salt, both in terms of that as just general advice, but also just to myself and how I incorporate sort of external feedback, if you will, and it can come from multiple places, whether you have a mentor, whether you have a family member, whether you have an employee, or whether it's through customers. I think there is a time and a place, and I've learned that while I'm deeply thinking about the problem at hand and coming up with the ideation phase, I don't need or want any external influences, because it takes away from the rawness of what I'm trying to achieve.
Yeah.
But the second I've got it to, out into the marketplace, as its sort of first version, if you will, and this is not sort of beta, this is kind of just the first version that was production ready, being sold to the public.
Yeah.
At that stage, I then completely flip almost and sort of really then want to learn, how are people using it? Are they, doing the things are they matching my hypotheses essentially? And I'm doing that a lot more now with Missinglettr, for example. We've built up a pretty big, fairly big gathering in our Facebook group. And I'm almost daily sort of going backwards and forwards on how's that working for you and everything else. And that feedback is super important. But that's because the idea has already been given a life, if you will. Once it's out there in the real world, then I want to collect information on it. But before it's at that stage and it's an idea, the way I work, I don't like to pollute the ideation phase with external sort of influences too much.
I always like to dig a little bit deeper and help the My Future Business audience to come up with ideas, because a lot of entrepreneurs struggle with this whole idea of getting ideas. How do you do this? How do you come up with new ideas? Are you watching around you? How does that happen?
No, so David Cancel from Drift, he has a podcast. I must confess I don't listen to it too much these days. But he is an avid reader, and he will often refer to this this sort of approach or sort of thinking, if you will, that he calls idea sex.
Mm-hmm.
And it's this basic principle, and I'm sure there's a more eloquent way of one could put it, but
It is
essentially
what it
it's
is.
this basic notion that if you just absorb information by just reading stuff because you enjoy reading it, don't do it because I am reading this book because I expect to get an instruction from it, or listen to this guy or speak to this person. Consume knowledge and consume information with the confidence that those bits of, your subconscious will start putting these things together and will have idea sets. One bit of grain of knowledge from this book with that grain of knowledge or insight from that conversation will sort of melt. And sometimes they will just fizzle out and you won't even be aware that it's happened. But every now and again, you'll be in the shower and this idea will come to you. And it's because you've opened yourselves up to a whole range of things. And so that's kind of the approach that I take. Personally, I've never had a problem with ideas. I've got too many of them.
Yeah.
What I find, and that's not to say they're all fantastic ideas, of course, but there's a whole sort of filtering system that goes through my mind sort of almost constantly, and I'm always thinking of the next thing. The thing that I found to be the most shifting, impactful thing that has really worked for me beyond the idea is actually getting good at translating an idea into some form of action. And that's the thing that I've seen most entrepreneurs and most sort of business owners fall at or fail at, which is, can you actually translate an idea into something tangible? Can you actually stick to a deadline and deliver, and not spend 2 years doing it and just procrastinating, but actually commit to something and get it out the door? That's for me is the most powerful thing. Now, as you say, obviously you have to have the idea before that, and if you struggle with ideas, definitely focus on that first, but don't assume that simply having an idea means that you're going to then succeed. You have to then hone that skill of getting it out into the marketplace.
Yeah, thank you for sharing, Ben. I know that you're involved with a pretty major deal site out there, and they've given you a platform to, I guess, springboard forward. And what I'd like to ask, Ben, is that you see a lot of businesses come and go. Now, I think a lot has to do with the people that are driving the businesses, and in this case, you. You have a lot of positive reinforcement coming from your community, and I wonder, what's the difference, do you think, between businesses that fail and those that survive long term?
Well, I think what you're touching on there is part of the answer. It's obviously largely great product backed up by a sound business strategy in a marketplace that actually has an appetite for the product that you're bringing to it. But that aside, I think it's the human side. No matter, as you were saying at the beginning, no matter what you're doing, there is a human behind. Whether you're CEO of an XYZ or a founder of this company or whatever it is, doesn't matter what the scale is. You're still a human behind it. And the second you realise that, and by the same token, realise that people engaging with you, your customers, your staff, and everyone else, they're all humans with similar problems and issues and challenges in life and everything else. For me, it's just about connections and treating other people how you would want to be treated. And that's not to say I get it right all the time, but I try and strive to get it right most of the time. And I think what you were alluding to at the just at the beginning of that question, there's a lot of goodwill that's come out of that. Not that I'm going into it explicitly for that goodwill. It's a byproduct. But yeah, I think a lot of people appreciate the way that we do things. And I think that's just because we're nice. And I think that sounds really flippy floppy and sort of weird.
No, not at all.
Just be nice to people and open your arm, have a conversation, jump on a call.
Imagine that being nice to people.
I think it translates.
Yeah, it's an obvious trait that you bring to the table, and it's a credit to you. Now, I'd like to shift gears, if we could, a little bit. You've talked about, I guess, presenting yourself in a certain way, and I think this goes into a bit of brand recognition. I often see that you're very consistent, not only with the way that you behave in front of your audience, but also from platform to platform, you have a very unique style. It's clean, it's fresh. Was that by design, or was that by, evolution? How did that come about, that style, that look, that feel?
So I'll just answer the way I present myself first, because I think it's worth noting that what I perceive or interpret you're touching on there is that no matter I mean, if we look at the deal site that we're on at the moment, you will sometimes get tough questions. And you'll get that on customer support channels as well, which is more private, just
Of
one-to-one,
course.
but certainly
Yep.
on the public ones as well, it's more public. But you'll get tough questions. People sometimes, pissed off at something, and that's perfectly, for various reasons. You can't control all of that.
No.
But what you can control is how you then respond to that. And I've always made it a point to be as cordial and as structured and as open-minded and everything else with those that are giving me praise as well as those that are giving me criticism. And so I'm always open, particularly in a deal like we're running through HeySummit at the moment, where I enter it with an open mind, knowing that I don't necessarily have all the answers. And what I mean by that is that quite often questions will be raised around, well, why is the deal including this and not that? Or have you thought about including that or not? Or maybe it's just a functional aspect of the product itself.
Yeah.
And I don't sort of respond combatively and say, that's the way it is, that's what we're doing. I will always sort of say, actually, that's interesting. Let me think about that and see see whether there's a groundswell of opinion supporting that and see what everyone else says. And quite often I will come back a day or two later implementing that thing, like changing the fundamental mechanics of the deal, the price, what you get for it. I'm not afraid to do that because I think you're showing that you're listening to people, and actually, if it's in demand and if it's a valid thing, I want people to have that because if it's valid, it's valid, and it doesn't suddenly become invalid because we're in deal mode or anything else.
Yeah.
So that's one side of it. The other side is the consistency around the design, and actually that's more through necessity. Speaking before about kind of getting good at delivering, at executing ideas. And a certain proportion of that, for me, is not having to reinvent the wheel with regards to design. So I think what you were talking about there, just for context for those listening, each of my businesses, although they are starting to depart organically because they have separate teams and they should be allowed to organically evolve from a design standpoint, when they were first launched, they all shared the same design, UX, the same color scheme, and everything else. Now, the benefit of that is that people associate it and they understand and recognize it, which is really, really good, actually. But actually, it comes from a point of selfishness. I want to get a product out the door. I want to be spending more time on the specifics of the product to make it a killer product and or a killer marketing sort of strategy, once the product is launched, versus forcing myself into this sort of corner where I'm having to come up with a brand new design every single time. So it's more out of necessity. But there are some fringe benefits with it as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I love it. The way that you just simply log in and you get what you need, and it's quick and it's responsive and it's all the things that it needs to be in the 21st century business environment. Now, what was your first product? Do you recall it?
Well, my first business was a bubblegum machine that I bought from an auction when I was about sort of 12 or 13 or something, and no one purchased anything. I put it outside my house, literally on the street, and I think they accepted the old 10p's, that sort of coins that were out of circulation. Plus, I then later discovered that the bubblegums were about 2 years old, so probably a good thing that no one did buy them because probably would have gone to hospital as a result. But my first actual business was something called Easy Peasy Print, and it was essentially, I don't know if you remember the MMS days on your mobile phone, multimedia message. Where it was a text message, but you could send an image with it. It sounds completely normal today, but back in the day, that was a big thing. And this was before smartphones and everything else. And so what we developed was this concept where you could text an MMS, so send a picture to our shortcode. We would do this sort of ping back, sort of automated thing where we would say, great, we've got it. What is your postcode? And then we'd send the postcode, and then we'd give them an option of all the different addresses that we found on that postcode and say what number is your house, and they type option 3 or whatever. Yep. And then we would charge them through the text message, so they'd be charged like £4 or £5 or something like that. And then within about 3 or 4 days, they would receive that photo nicely framed on their doorstep. So it was like basically photo print sort of service, Easy Peasy Print. But it came around pretty much too late. Timing is key. So our smartphones hadn't quite come out, but they were just about to, and so when they did, it kind of killed the need for that, really, because then people were developing apps to do that, and the people getting photos off phones became less of an issue. It just became the norm. But yeah, that was the first one.
So leading on from there, from a deal site perspective, correct me if I'm wrong, please, Ben. I believe it was HelpShelp first, is the one I first experienced, followed by HeySummit, then Missinglettr, and now Missinglettr PostBox. I'm wondering if we can. Would that be right? Is that the order?
No, that's wrong actually. It was Missinglettr,
Oh, bugger.
but that's okay. I get confused myself. Missinglettr, then HelpShelp, then HeySummit, then Onboard Flow, and now Missinglettr PostBox.
Yes, now I've just got my hands on PostBox, and very exciting product to have my hands on. And I've noticed already, for everybody who doesn't actually understand, hopefully Ben, you can share a little bit about this, but I've already looked in my dashboard. I'm having people sharing my content, and this is fundamentally different than what I'm used to seeing. I'm wondering if you could maybe share a little bit about what Missinglettr PostBox is in a condensed format.
Condensed. Well, that's a challenge. Let's see. Okay, I'll do
You've
my best.
got 3 seconds.
Okay, 3 seconds. So I guess the simple way of thinking about it is if we think about adverts in Facebook, when you can compose an advert, you're building your audience, you're composing your creative, so your copy and your image if you choose to have one, and then you will activate that advert, and then it gets distributed across Facebook. Postbox is somewhat similar to that, but it's not a paid sort of service. So it's where you have content that you want to promote organically through other people's social media audiences. So imagine you have a blog post, but it could be a video, it could be an Instagram link, it could be an infographic, anything with a link, basically, with a web destination. You want to promote that, and you have already shared it with your social followers. That's great, but you want to broaden that reach. And so you can enter that or add it into the PostBox library. And then that means that other people within PostBox can then discover that content. So just like with Facebook adverts, when you compose that post to add to the PostBox library, you're building your audience. So you're choosing your categories, your topics, your language that it's based on, and a few other criteria as well. And what we'll tell you is we'll give you an idea as to that potential audience, social audience available to you based on that criteria. So it might be 2 million, 3 million, 500,000, whatever it might be. And that basically is a number that represents the total potential social audience, or the social followers that are following the people that are following those categories within PostBox. So it's not literally how many people will see it, it's just how many could see it should they all be online, and if the search engines and algorithms present it at the right time and all that sort of stuff. But essentially, people in PostBox can find that content that you promoted and then choose to share that with their audience. And they're sharing it with their audience because just like you've already exhausted sharing that one piece of content with your own audience, people sharing your content have also exhausted their opportunities. And so they care about the categories or the industries that their business is related to, and therefore that their followers are following them based on. And so they want to find additional content to share with their audience that is industry relevant, to really deepen that relationship and engagement with them. And so it's a two-sided marketplace in that sort of sense. But effectively, short elevator pitch would be, it helps find the best audience for your content. And if you're doing it the other way around, it finds the best content for your audience.
Now, in terms of quality, this is a great parameter, a hugely important parameter for the success of this particular platform, as is the community behind it. What are the mechanisms in place to make sure that you maintain the quality of the posts, and what would prompt somebody to share somebody's content that they know nothing about apart from reading it?
Yeah, so I mean, and this is probably the one thing that we spend most of our time thinking about, and there's multiple ways of tackling that. So let's go for the blunt tool first of all, and that is just empowering the end user to report stuff if it's just not appropriate. Because what we're trying to create here is an open platform for people to add their content, and it should be the market that decides, whether it's appropriate, whether it's well matched, and everything else. We don't want to necessarily be the arbiters of what's right and wrong, politically or religiously or anything else like that. Obviously, where lines are crossed from a legal aspect, of course, we will clamp down on those. So we empower users to either block a website or a publisher if they just don't want to do it. And that might not be because it's inappropriate. It might just be that they just, that particular language or style of writing, they just know won't resonate with their audience, so they can choose to block that. So we're empowering them. If it does fall into that category, if it's spammy or it's too salesy or something else, they can report it and categorize it as such. Leading on to that, we then have a quality score that everyone has, whether you're sharing or promoting content within it, that is influenced based on how many people are sharing, how many people are flagging it. And so we have an algorithm that helps surface the best content, and so that helps bring the best quality content to the fore. And then we have some other things at the point at which you actually publish the or add the content to the library. Simple little things. An example being first-person checker. So when you let's say you want to promote your blog post, you're writing a tweet to add to, you're composing your social content to add to the PostBox library. You'll click publish. At that point, we'll actually do a few checks to make sure that it's written nicely and it doesn't, that it's using the right URL. But from a first-person standpoint, we'll check that and let you know, hey, it looks like you're writing in the first person, which is actually more common than you would think, because sometimes when you're trying to add a bit of content to add to the library for other people to share, you forget that you're adding something for other people to share. And so you write it in the first person, say, hey, this is something I wrote recently, some great tips that I found really useful. Now, that might well be true, but you can't say that that's going to be true for the person sharing it. So we will check that and we'll say, hey, it looks like you're writing in the first person. If you are comfortable with this, click go, but actually we recommend editing it and removing that and saying, and just removing that first person sort of context. So just some small examples of some of the things that we're doing, and we've only been around for sort of 4 weeks in terms of PostBox. So there are many other things that we'll be working on
very exciting
to help support that sort of idea of quality control.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, for everybody who's on the call with us at the moment, I know that Ben, you have just completed a webinar with AppSumo, which you can find on YouTube. I suspect they would just need to type in Missinglettr PostBox AppSumo as the keywords to find that webinar. I've watched it myself. It's very, very useful, something I recommend that everybody who's on the call tonight have a look at. In actual fact, I might actually provide the link as a video inside of this post. But Ben, we've spoken about you. We've learned a little bit more about your background, the fact that there is humans behind businesses. We've talked about some of your ideation processes. We've talked about so much in such a short amount of time. And I just have to say thank you so very much for spending some time with me on the My Future Business show today.
Hey, pleasure. Thanks so much for having me on.
Thanks for joining us today. If you enjoyed the call, then make sure to subscribe, leave a comment, share us with your friends, and book your spot on the show at myfuturebusiness.com/interviews. And if you're looking for solutions that will help grow your business, then visit myfuturebusiness.com/shop.